Hello everyone, this is John from Vulgar Kitten Studios and welcome to episode 5 of our Introduction to Web Development and PHP MVC tutorial series. In the background is my girlfriend Caitlin, and so she's doing homework for her vet school, so she's just going to kind of be hanging out. But anyway, let's just go ahead and get started. What we're gonna be doing today is working on a little bit of a beautification and set up for a service, for our view service anyway. So I've gone ahead and created a class, which is kind of outside of the scope of this tutorial, just to be able to change the colors of our shell commands and Cygwin itself. So I'm going to link that in the description below, and you can download that. And what you'll want to do is you'll want to basically put it in your commands. So you want to make sure that you have the namespace or the namespace under sexy commands, and just stick that in the commands folder. And that way we can use the write and string functions in order to write out some colored text. And you can also change your background colors and so on and so forth. It's just a modified version of some stuff that I found online, so I didn't really feel it necessary to make a tutorial about it, a full tutorial anyway. So I've gone ahead and changed around a couple of things, not the app, which we will need that in a little bit, but I've gone ahead and wherever I've used echo in our lace class and within our fly class, I've changed the echoes into using shell write, and then you can pass in a color. So basically what that looks like is, let me go ahead and go into development, sexy right here, and we'll just PHP lace fly, and there we go. So the help is actually going to use a green color. So yeah, and tests something right there. All right, so there we go. And so now I'm actually going to go ahead and get rid of this method test because we're not going to be using that. But what I will be wanting to do is create our first service, which is our view service. And that way we can actually interface into the Laravel Blade templating engine and start making use of that within our commands and setting all that up. So let me go ahead and minimize this down. And so the way that we're going to work with services is, first of all, we're going to need a container. So I'm going to create a new container, and I'm just going to save this out and call this services.json. And just like before, we're going to create an object, and we're going to give it a key called services, and that's going to be equal to an array, and that is going to have some fields in there for each of our services. So our first service is going to be view. So what this is going to do, this is going to allow us to create a singleton pattern for our entire application, and that way whenever we create classes that actually do something within our application, we can call it through our app container. And so the way that is going to work is, in our app container, we're going to create a new public static function and call this service. So that way we can call a service and we'll pass in the class of the service, or the class as the service. And so what I mean by when I say service, this is a little bit confusing because what it is a layer of the models. So within our model view controller, basically the way that it works, or let me rename this, this is actually models. The way that it works is our model contains our business logic. So the way an MVC works is we have a model, a view, and a controller. The controller basically tells our routes what models to access and what controllers to access and stuff like that. So what that is if you think about it like in terms of like an orchestra, the controller would be like the conductor. So that actually tells our models what is our musicians, so the violinist, what to do, and that violinist would be the model, which is conducting the business logic, telling the violin what to do, which would be like our view. So that's pretty much the best way that I can explain it. So I'm sorry if that doesn't make any sense. Hopefully it will as we go through this. So within our models, we're actually going to have 3 different layers, but for now we're only going to make one. We're going to call it services, and we're just going to hold all of our services within a folder called services. And like I said, we are going to have 3 different layers, so we're also going to have filters, and we're going to have accessors as well. So basically, we're separating out the different types of models that we can have as well. But our service is going to be called view. So we're going to name the file view.php. And within here, we're obviously going to have to open up PHP. And we're going to create a class, and that is going to be namespace under sexy models services. And it's going to be called view. We're not going to extend anything, but we are going to want to make use of our library, of our Laravel Blade library, and that is namespaced under Duncan 3DC, or yeah, 3DC Laravel Blade instance, like that. And so we don't have a constructor in here. We're going to be making it static. Like most of all of the stuff that we're going to be doing is going to be in static. So this is going to contain like all of our helper classes and stuff. So we're going to have a protected static Blade variable, which is actually going to hold our instance, and we'll make a private function and just call this instance, or actually it's going to be a static function, so we'll make a private static function called instance. And this is going to take in where our actual views folder will be, so we'll need to make that as well. We're going to go ahead and create a views folder within our app folder, and this is where we're going to store all of our views. And this is actually going to require us to use a cache folder as well. So we're going to create a cache folder within the views folder, and we're going to pass that in as our cache. And again, these are going to have to actually point to our cache and view directories. So we'll do it like this. And the reason that I'm actually going out of the directory and going back into the app is because where we're actually calling all of this is going to be from our index.php page, which remember is in public. And so in order to call that, we actually need to come out of public and then back into app. And that is because all of our entire app is held within this initialize function for app. And so what we can do with this is we can say self blade is equal to a new blade instance, and then just pass in the views and the cache. And we'll also want to make sure that we give our cache directory the appropriate permissions. So what we'll have to do is go into, we're already in our root directory, so what we can do is we can chmod tacr 777 on app views cache, and we just need to make sure that we give that full privileges so that it can do its thing. Otherwise, you're going to get errors. And so now that we have that, we can actually start creating our functions to call create instances of views, I should say. So we'll create a function for rendering a view, and that'll be a public static function called render. And we'll pass in the actual view and then any data if there is any, because with the Laravel Blade we can actually construct variables and pass them into the view and then use them like PHP would normally use, just in a native PHP file. And so the first thing that we want to do is we want to check to see if we're actually using this within the browser or if we're using it within the command line, because the file path is actually going to vary based on those two different things. So we'll say if, and we'll use the superglobal server, and we'll want to check the file, so we'll use php self. So if php self is equal to lace. Then we'll use self instance, and we'll pass in the views like that. Otherwise, we'll just use it from a directory below like that. And so if this is the case, or if we have actually passed in any data, or if we haven't passed in any data, I should say, then we're just going to echo out self blade render, and we'll use view for that. Otherwise, we're going to echo out self blade render, and we're going to pass in the view, but we're also going to pass in whatever our array of data is as well. And so that way we can pass in our variables, just like I said before. And we can also create some other helper functions within our view class, just to make things a little bit easier and just to give us a couple of shortcuts. So basically what we can do is we can, since we have our render function, we can also set up one for errors. So we can change this to error like that. And within our views, we can create a new folder. We call this errors. And so that way we can actually store our errors within here. And essentially all we have to do now is just like pass on the directory that we want to access. And that way it'll just make it a little bit easier for us to keep track of everything, and it just gives us a shortcut. And also, not only do we want to be able to render a view, but we also want to possibly return a view as a string. So what we can do is we can actually copy this, and we'll make a view. So we'll change this to make, and we have the default file path, and we'll just stop using the render function and use the make function instead. And instead of echoing it, what we want to do is we'll just return it. And so we can essentially do the same thing. Like we can do this, we'll want to do this for emails as well. So we can create a new folder, and we can say emails, and just create a shortcut for that as well. So we just copy our make function, and we'll call that mail, so view mail, and then just pass on the emails directory like that. Emails. And so that is actually our view class complete. And now we can start making use of that within our command line interface. But before we can do that, we need a way to access it. And so if you remember in our commands, we're using sexy app. And the reason that we use this is because we want to be able to access any kind of services. So we'll come in here and we'll go ahead and fill this out now. And the way that we're going to do that is we're just basically going to instantiate every single class that we have in our services from the beginning. And I mean, there are more efficient ways to do this. You could set up some logic to auto load them in separately from the from our vendor file, from our vendor's autoloader, or you could just do it this way. And like I said, instantiate everything at one time, and then only call one instance of each one of those services. So what we'll do is we'll say, again, if our server PHP self is equal to lace, then we'll set a container variable, which is going to be equal to file get contents, and we'll want to get the app containers services.json file. And of course, we also want an else, which is going to be one directory higher, like that. And so now that we have our container, we need to actually decode that. So we'll make that equal to JSON decode, and then the container itself. And so now that we have the object, we can construct a loop, which is going to be I equals 0, I is less than count our container services, then I plus, and then we can just basically start calling those. So we'll say container services I is equal to trim, and we want to trim that just to make sure that we don't have anything extra on the string. And there we go. And so now we'll set it to the namespace. So we'll say container services I is equal to sexy, and escape that models services, and then concatenate on the container and the index of the loop that we're at. And now, of course, you guessed it, all we have to do is just initialize it. So we'll say that is equal to a new container services I, like so. And so now that we have actually instantiated it, what we can do is actually get the class. And so we'll use a for each loop for this one, just to make things a little bit shorter. And we'll say container services for each container services as service. And we'll use the strPos again just to check the string. And we'll say get class, which is just a native PHP function, service, and class. Whoa. Like that. And in this case, all we have to do is just return that service. And we'll be returning the actual class itself, not just the string. We'll be returning the class. And so now that we have that, we can go ahead and actually start creating views. So what I want to do is I want to create a new folder down here, and I'll say templates. I'll call this templates, and then within the templates we can have a couple of different folders like our front end, our admin, and I'm going to make one for code, so that way we can create some code generators that will automatically generate code for us. And so what we can do with that is, well, like I said, we can actually just start using it. So the first thing that I want to do is I want to kind of pretty up our command line just a little bit. So I'm going to go into Google Chrome here, and I'm going to Google a ASCII art generator. And so basically I'm just going to type in lace in here and just get some ASCII art that we can store in a view. And what we'll do is we'll put this in our views folder somewhere. And so under code, I'll create a new file, and I'll just throw this in here, and I'll save it out as header.blade.php, like that. And so now under lace, what we can do is whenever we actually see that we have a count of arguments, we can say self, or whenever we don't actually have a count of arguments, we can say self header, and I'll create a header function. So I'll come down here and create that at the bottom of the file, and I'll say public static function header, and we don't need any parameters, and we'll just set the header to be equal to app service view, and we'll call the make function on templates.code.header. And I actually want to change the color, so I'm going to create an array of colors, and that is just going to be equal to an array. And within here, I'm just going to put in all of the colors that I can possibly have. So it'll be like dark gray, or dark gray, red, light red, yellow, blue, green, light green, brown, light blue, cyan, purple, light purple, and white. And so what I'll do is I'll use our shell write, and we'll pass it the header, and we'll concatenate on a \n, which is just regular expression for the next line, and then we'll use our colors array to pick the color, and that is going to use the rand function in PHP, and just give it a random number from 0 to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. So that will be 13, that'll be 12. And now if we just PHP lace, then we actually see that it fires that off with a view, and that is calling our view service through our app container. So that's generally what I wanted to achieve in the first place. So that pretty much does it for this video, and in our next video we'll go ahead and start creating our generators, and we'll finish up our CLI command so we can create more commands and just get the ball rolling a little bit quicker. So thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.